It is a wet October morning in a narrow Welsh valley, the kind of morning Aberfan has known all its life. Low cloud pinned to the hills, drizzle hanging in the air like smoke, and the black shape of the spoil tips looming above the village, familiar as the church steeple and the pithead. Rain has been falling for weeks, turning the verges slick and the unpaved footpaths to clinging mud. But in a coal village, damp and dirt are part of the wallpaper of everyday life. The tips are there every morning, dark and silent, and most people no longer look up at them. Inside Pantglas Junior School, the day begins with the ritual of arrival. Boots dripping in the corridors, the scrape of chairs on wooden floors, the clatter of metal coat hooks as children shrug off wet coats and hang their bags. Desks are scarred with years of nervous scribbles, inkwells and pencil shavings, the faint smell of chalk dust and wet wool rising as the rooms fill with voices. Outside, the terraced houses on Moy Road are waking too, kettles whistling, wirelesses murmuring, coal fires being poked back to life. One child, call him Geraint, steps out of his front door, his bag banging softly against his side. His mother tightens his scarf against the damp wind and wipes a faint streak of coal dust from his cheek with a thumb, the same way she does every morning before school. The hill behind the village is just a shadow in the mist, the spoil tips only half visible, their flanks streaked with rain. To him, they are not engineering structures or risk, they are just part of the backdrop, as permanent as the sky. On the hill itself, wagons and tracks sit quiet for the moment, rails vanishing up into the fog, the top of Tip 7 hidden. Somewhere inside that black mound, water has been seeping and pooling for days, turning parts of it from solid to something else, but no one in the village can see that. What they see is only the wet face of the tip, glistening a little in the dim light, as it has on many other mornings after rain. In the school, a young teacher straightens a neat row of exercise books and glances at the wall clock. It is nearly time to ring the bell to start lessons, the last morning before the half-term break due to begin at midday. She thinks about the day's work, reading, sums, perhaps a song before they go home, and about the children who will soon be sitting in the rows before her. There is nothing in the way the floor feels under her shoes, nothing in the sound of the rain on the windows to suggest that anything is wrong. Across the village, people notice small, ordinary details of a wet Friday, a trickle of water running down a lane that seems a bit fuller than usual, a patch of garden that squelches underfoot instead of just feeling damp. A dog refuses to walk up toward the hillside path and pulls back toward the main road, nails skittering on the pavement. These things register and then slip away, filed under bad weather rather than danger. Tip 7, a black ridge above the town, has shifted slightly in past years, but those were events discussed in meetings, not in kitchens and classrooms. Down in Aberfan that morning, the soundscape is the same as any school day. Children shouting, buses rumbling along the road, the faint hum of the colliery farther along the valley. Routine wraps everything like a blanket, muffling whatever unease might otherwise be felt. The bell rings for morning lessons. Children file into classrooms, the scrape and shuffle of dozens of small feet, chairs banging as they sit. Outside, the rain is easing, the mist thinning and thickening in slow breaths. Above the village, the tip is quiet, a black shape partly swallowed by cloud. It begins with a sound that does not belong to a school day. At first, it is just a low murmur like distant thunder folded into the hum of the village, easy to mistake for a heavy truck or a train grinding along the tracks. A boy near the classroom window pauses, pencil in hand, brows knitting as the floor seems to hold its breath for a moment. The teacher looks up but says nothing. The noise swells, fades, then returns, closer. Up on the hillside, something deep within Tip 7 has given way. The crest of the tip has slumped in the night, leaving a sagging hollow, and now the saturated lower layers begin to move, slowly at first, then faster, like a heavy blanket sliding off a bed. A mass of black spoil, loosened and turned to slurry in places, starts to flow down the slope, picking up fragments as it goes. To those who will later call it an avalanche or a landslide, it is a physical event. To those below, in this instant, it is a sound. The murmur grows into a roar that rolls down the valley walls, a deep, rushing, grinding noise that seems to come from everywhere at once. Windows rattle in their frames, cups tremble on saucers. On Moy Road, a woman opens her front door to look toward the hill and sees the mist boiling, a shape moving within it. For a heartbeat, she cannot understand what she's seeing. The hillside itself appears to be coming down. In the school, the roar hits like a physical force, making the walls shudder, the chalk on the blackboard dusting down in a faint white haze. Children turn toward the windows, eyes wide, conversations cut off mid-sentence. The teacher opens her mouth to speak, "Stay in your seats," but the words are swallowed by the noise. Her last clear thought is a flare of confusion. This cannot be happening. The slurry is moving now with terrifying speed, a dark, glistening wave pouring down the slope, carrying rock, water, and coal waste, thick enough to engulf, fast enough to smash. It hits a farmhouse and cottages on its path and simply erases them, tearing roofs from walls, sweeping everything into the flow. People inside have no time to flee. Their homes are there one moment and gone the next, folded into the black rush.
The wave reaches the disused canal and the water main laid along it. Pipes fracture with a sharp metallic crack, and water bursts into the moving spoil, feeding it, loosening it, driving it on. The mass vaults an old railway embankment that once held coal trains, the barrier too low, too fragile against the momentum now unleashed. By the time the slurry clears the last man-made obstacle above the village, it is no longer creeping, it is charging. On Moy Road, the ground shakes. A child at home sick in bed hears the roar and feels the house shiver. Before they can call out, the window goes black. Glass explodes inward, mud and debris punching into the room, filling it with choking darkness. Outside, people on the street see the wave coming and freeze, brains struggling to compute what their eyes report. The hillside, where the tip stood, is no longer still. It is moving toward them. In Pantglas Junior School, lessons have just begun. In one classroom, a teacher is taking attendance. In another, children are opening books on their desks. The windows face toward the hill. Some children never see what hits them. They only feel the world tilt and hear the roar become a scream of breaking glass, collapsing brick, splintering wood. The mass strikes the school building with a violence that defies analogy. Walls buckle, entire sections of the structure crumple as if paper. Rooms are crushed, then flooded with thick black slurry. Desks and chairs are hurled, ceiling beams come down like falling trees. The air fills with dust, shouts, and then, in many rooms, with the muffled silence of buried space. For some inside, there are seconds of awareness, the floor dropping, a sudden darkness as the windows vanish under the black wave, the taste of grit and coal dust in the mouth. A child reaches for a friend's hand and feels only mud and broken wood. Another, thrown clear of their desk by the impact, finds themselves pinned in a small pocket of space, unable to move, the weight of the world pressing down on their chest. The wave does not stop at the school. It rolls on, smashing into houses along the road, tearing out walls, swallowing rooms whole. 18 houses are destroyed, their brick fronts torn away, their insides suddenly exposed, then coated and filled with sludge. The sludge oozes into everything, into cribs, under tables, into cupboards, leaving behind not just destruction, but a suffocating, clinging presence. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the movement slows. The roar drops back into a heavy, wet silence, broken only by the drip of mud and the distant, echoing cries of those who can still call out. The black wave has reached the road and come to rest around 9:15 a.m., leaving a jagged, unnatural shoreline of spoil and shattered buildings. The hillside above is changed, a gaping scar where Tip 7 once stood. But to those in the village, the focus is now on the chaos in front of them. For a moment after the slide stops, there is a stunned, unreal quiet. People stand in the street, clothes streaked with mud thrown up by the impact, ears ringing from the roar. Then the screams begin. Half heard at first, faint and buried, then more insistent. Someone shouts, "The school!" and the spell breaks. Men and women start to run toward the black mound now sitting where the building should be. They arrive to a sight their minds cannot parse. Where there were walls and windows a few minutes ago, there is a heap of black spoil, timbers jutting at odd angles, a corner of roof, the fragments of a playground fence sticking up like broken ribs. The air smells of wet earth, coal, plaster dust, and something metallic. There is no clear door to open, no simple way in. The school has been absorbed. People start digging with their hands. At first, there are almost no tools. They claw at the wet spoil, scraping it aside in frantic armfuls, nails tearing, fingers going numb in the cold slurry. The mud is heavier than it looks, thick and sticky, sucking back as they pull, swallowing shovels when they finally arrive. Someone brings a pickaxe, others hand along buckets, doors ripped from hinges, anything that can carry spoil away. They listen for voices. Every time someone shouts, "Quiet!" the whole chaotic scene freezes, hundreds of people holding their breath as they strain to hear a cry from beneath the black surface. A faint voice here, another there. They converge, dig, dig, dig. Sometimes they find a child alive, face gray with mud, eyes wide and shocked, pulled from the slurry and passed along human chains of arms to the relative safety of the road. Each rescue is a small miracle wrested from a landscape that suddenly feels hostile. The last child is brought out alive around 11 a.m., carried from the filthy morass 2 hours after the slide stopped. By then, the village is swarming with rescuers, miners from the nearby colliery still in their work clothes, police officers, ambulance crews, and later soldiers and emergency teams from farther afield. The miners move with grim familiarity in the black sludge. They know this material, its weight and its dangers, but they have never handled it like this, out in the open, on the bodies of their own children. The spoil is unstable, treacherous underfoot. Rescue workers sink to their knees as they move, passing shovelfuls of black mud down lines of volunteers, the weight dragging at their backs and arms. Every now and then someone shouts a warning as a section slumps, threatening to bury those digging. They keep going. The work becomes not just physical, but personal. Every small body found is someone's child, someone's neighbor, the child of a man you might have shared a shift with underground. Inside the pockets of space under the mud, time distorts. A child pinned in darkness hears muffled thuds, distant shouts, feels the pressure around them shift as rescuers dig closer. It is hard to breathe. The air is thick with dust and damp. Perhaps they call out, perhaps their voice is too faint to carry. For some, the rescuers arrive in time. For many, they do not. As the day wears on, the weather closes in and opens again in fits, rain spitting down, making the spoil slicker, the wind cutting through wet clothes. Floodlights are set up as darkness approaches, their harsh beams turning the scene into an otherworldly stage of mud and broken walls. The search continues into the night and the following days, not measured in minutes anymore, but in the endurance of those who will not leave while there is any chance, however small, that someone still lies alive beneath the black mass. In the streets beyond the immediate disaster zone, the village has become a place of waiting. Parents walk up and down, faces blank with shock, asking anyone who comes from the site the same question: "Have you seen my boy, my girl?" Some roam between the school site and hastily organized aid centers, unwilling to be away from the place where their children might be found. Others stand rooted in place, staring at the hillside, trying to reconcile the shape of the village in their memory with what they see in front of them now. Makeshift mortuaries are set up, rows of small bodies laid out, each one washed and wrapped as carefully as possible. Local halls and chapels are transformed into places where families come to identify their children, a process as necessary as it is unbearable. The silence in those rooms is heavy, broken by the occasional stifled sob or cry when a mother or father recognizes a familiar face, a lock of hair, a piece of clothing. The psychological shock ripples outward. Children who survived, the ones who happened to be in a different classroom, or absent, or in a position the slide didn't reach, struggle to understand why they are alive when so many friends are not. Some will grow up with vivid, recurring memories: the sound of the roar, the sudden darkness, the feel of mud pressing in, the smell of coal dust. Others will carry the images burned into them that day: a hand protruding from the spoil, a toy half buried in the mud, the sight of the school's clock frozen at the moment of impact. In the days that follow, the outside world arrives in force: reporters, officials, dignitaries, church leaders. Cameras capture images that will be replayed for decades: lines of rescuers, faces blackened with coal and mud, small coffins in heartbreaking rows, the hillside scar above the village. The community, still in the thick of digging and burying, experiences this attention as something distant and surreal. For them, the disaster is not a headline, but a hole where their children used to be.
Funerals begin, sometimes dozens of small coffins carried in a single procession. Families stand in crowded cemeteries, the landscape reshaped not just by the physical slide, but by the sudden presence of so many graves. Hymns are sung in Welsh and English, voices breaking. The black of mourning clothes merges with the black of coal dust and the black of the hillside above, a palette that seems to cover everything in Aberfan now. At night, after the work of digging is done for the day, the village is very quiet. In houses spared by the slide, parents sit in the half-dark, surrounded by the objects of ordinary life: school bags, toys, clothes laid out for a day that never came. Outside, floodlights still shine on the spoil heap and the ruins of the school, where teams continue their grim search. The tips are no longer a neutral backdrop. They are an active presence, a threat that has stepped down out of the hills into the heart of the community. For many in Aberfan, time will always divide into before that Friday morning and after. The memory of the disaster does not fade with the mud and debris. It becomes part of how they see the valley, the hills, and themselves. The roar, the black wave, the digging by hand in the rain, these will remain carried quietly inside those who were there, long after the spoil has been cleared and the cameras have gone. What happened in Aberfan on that October morning was not a random act of nature, and it was not an accident in the sense of something unforeseeable. To understand how a spoil tip above a school could turn into a lethal wave that killed 144 people, we have to step back from the roar and the mud and look at the decisions, assumptions, and systems that made it possible. Part 2 turns from memory to understanding, from what it was like to be there to how the tip was built, why it failed, and what has changed since. At its core, the Aberfan disaster was the failure of a spoil tip, Tip 7, built on unsafe ground and allowed to become saturated with water until it lost its ability to stand and collapsed as a fast-moving slurry.
Coal mining produces large volumes of waste rock and fine material, and at Merthyr Vale Colliery, this spoil was heaped into a series of tips on the steep hillside above Aberfan. Tip 7, begun in 1958, was the active tip in 1966 and had grown to more than 100 feet high. The most important physical fact is where that tip was placed. Tip 7 was partly sited on ground crossed by natural springs and water-bearing strata, conditions marked on Ordnance Survey maps and known locally. Under static conditions, even a poorly designed tip might stand for a time, but water is a powerful destabilizing agent in granular materials. Weeks of heavy rain in early October 1966 led to around 6.5 inches of rainfall, with nearly half falling in the third week, saturating the tip. Inside the tip, this water did not simply sit harmlessly. As it accumulated within the lower layers, it increased pore water pressure, reducing the effective friction between particles and weakening the internal structure of the spoil mass. At some point during the night of 20 to 21 October, the crest of Tip 7 subsided by about 9 to 10 feet, an early sign that the internal structure had been compromised. The rails carrying spoil wagons into the tip slumped into a depression, evidence of significant movement at the top. What followed was a classic slope failure, in which a portion of the saturated material passed beyond a critical state and transformed from behaving like a solid to behaving like a heavy, viscous liquid. Once a portion of the lower tip liquefied, it began to move, releasing energy that in turn liquefied adjacent saturated zones, producing the dark, fast-moving wave described by eyewitnesses. Estimates of the volume that moved vary. One British Geological Survey account cites around 107,000 cubic meters of spoil in the main slide. Several human and procedural failures allowed this physical scenario to develop. First, the siting of Tip 7 on or near known springs violated basic principles of tip safety, and evidence suggests that knowledge of the springs existed both in maps and in local experience. Second, there had been previous movements. Tip 7 experienced shifts in 1963, including an event described by the National Coal Board, NCB, as a tailings run, which the organization insisted did not compromise the tip's stability. These incidents could have been treated as explicit warnings that water-related instability was already a problem. Third, there was no effective geotechnical design or ongoing monitoring in modern terms. Spoil tipping was largely managed by rule-of-thumb practices rather than by systematic engineering analysis of slope stability, drainage, and foundation conditions. The NCB's internal arrangements for tip safety were fragmented, with unclear lines of responsibility and limited communication between those with technical knowledge of tip behavior and those managing everyday tipping operations. When concerns were raised, including letters from local authorities warning that the slurry on the steep gradient could not stay in position in winter or during heavy rain, they did not translate to decisive action to relocate or properly drain the tip. Organizationally, the system normalized risk. Spoil tips above communities were common. Previous small incidents had not produced catastrophe, and the pressure to maintain coal production and tipping capacity discouraged major changes. In summary, what went wrong can be put in one sentence. A large spoil tip was placed on water-bearing ground above a village, allowed to become saturated without proper drainage or monitoring, and in the absence of adequate oversight and response to warnings, eventually liquefied and collapsed as a deadly flow. The Aberfan disaster imposed technical lessons on geotechnical and mining engineering that remain relevant decades later.
One clear technical lesson is that waste is an engineered structure, not an afterthought. Spoil tips, tailings dams, and other waste piles must be designed with the same rigor as embankments or dams, with attention to foundation conditions, drainage, material properties, and long-term behavior under varying weather. Building a large spoil heap on top of springs or water-saturated strata invites instability. The event at Aberfan reinforced a need to avoid such siting or to provide robust drainage if avoidance is impossible. A second technical lesson is the critical role of water and liquefaction in slopes composed of fine, loosely deposited material. The transition from solid-like to fluid-like behavior under saturation and shear stress is now a central concern in designing and managing tips and tailings facilities. Aberfan, alongside other failures, helped drive the development of better analytical methods and practical rules for managing pore water pressures, drainage systems, and monitoring in spoil heaps and tailings dams. On the human and organizational side, Aberfan exposed how dangerous it is when risk warnings do not connect to authority and action. Local councils had expressed concerns about the tips and their potential to move, and previous tip movements provided real-world evidence of instability, but those signals were effectively dismissed or minimized by the NCB. This highlights the importance of institutional mechanisms that ensure concerns from local observers, junior engineers, or outside bodies can trigger independent review and, if necessary, override production pressures. The disaster also illustrates the danger of normalization of deviance when risky conditions become part of the accepted background because nothing bad has happened yet. Spoil tips looming over communities were common in coal regions, and minor slides that did not kill people reinforced the belief that the system, while untidy, was acceptable. Aberfan shows how a system can drift into an unsafe state without any single dramatic decision, but through a series of small choices, omissions, and rationalizations. More broadly, Aberfan teaches that engineering responsibilities extend beyond the asset boundary. The people who placed and managed Tip 7 were not designing a bridge or a dam in the traditional sense, but their decisions created a large, elevated mass of potentially mobile material directly above a vulnerable population. Modern engineering ethics now emphasize the duty of care includes downstream and downslope communities, not just the immediate industrial site. In sectors from mining to chemical processing, the lesson is clear. If your byproducts can move, leak, or collapse, they must be treated as engineered risks with explicit safeguards. These lessons are transferable well beyond coal mining, to tailings dams in metal mining, to levees, to embankments supporting highways or railways, and even to large-scale earthworks in urban development. Whenever large volumes of soil or waste are piled up, especially above people, the combination of water, gravity, and time demands respect. In the years after Aberfan, the UK made significant changes to how spoil tips and related structures are managed, reflecting both the tribunal's findings and evolving engineering practice. The official inquiry into the disaster was unequivocal in its judgment, placing responsibility squarely on the National Coal Board and describing the disaster as one that could and should have been prevented. The report criticized the ignorance of tip siting and behavior at multiple levels of the organization, as well as a failure to act on known hazards. These findings helped drive the introduction of more formal, legally enforceable controls on spoil tips and mine waste. Regulatory frameworks for mine and quarries waste in the UK were strengthened, eventually contributing to a regime in which tips must be designed, inspected, and managed under the supervision of competent engineers, with explicit attention to drainage and stability. Many old tips were regraded, drained, or removed altogether, particularly those situated close to communities or on unstable ground. The British Geological Survey and other technical bodies increased their involvement in providing guidance on landslide and tip stability. Internally, the coal industry and later bodies responsible for former NCB sites developed systems for regular geotechnical inspections, instrumented monitoring where appropriate, and documented emergency plans. Institutional awareness of landslide and tip-related risk improved, and the idea that spoil management could be left entirely to local, production-focused practice became unacceptable. Internationally, Aberfan is often cited alongside other catastrophic tailings and waste failures in shaping global guidance on mine waste management. Industry standards and best practice documents now emphasize tip and tailings design criteria, minimum factors of safety, drainage systems, monitoring for pore pressures and deformation, and requirements for independent review. While many of these developments have multiple routes, Aberfan remains a prominent example in case studies and training. However, the existence of new regulations and standards does not mean the risk has vanished. Subsequent tailings dam failures around the world show that mine waste structures can still fail due to poor design, inadequate maintenance, mismanagement of water, or organizational pressures that override safety concerns. The enduring relevance of Aberfan lies in its reminder that technical rules and oversight must be accompanied by a culture that truly prioritizes safety and listens to warnings, especially where communities are directly exposed. Aberfan is, first and last, a story of people. 116 children and 28 adults whose lives ended in a matter of minutes when a man-made hillside failed above their homes and school. The village lost a generation in a single morning, and the survivors, parents, siblings, classmates, teachers, carried that loss forward for the rest of their lives. From an engineering perspective, the disaster exposed clear, concrete failures in siting, drainage, and oversight, and it helped reshape how mine waste is managed and regulated. Those changes and the lessons drawn in classrooms, design offices, and control rooms worldwide are one way the victims are remembered. Each spoil tip relocated, each tailings dam properly drained, each risk taken seriously because of Aberfan is a small act of respect. But remembrance is not static. Each time a new waste-related failure occurs, it tests whether the lessons of Aberfan have truly been learned or only recited. The responsibility that emerges from this disaster is twofold: to honor those who died by telling the story accurately and without sensationalism, and to ensure that in every project where earth is piled high above homes and schools, someone is asking the difficult questions about water, stability, and what happens if the hillside moves.